Today I'm sitting down with Rick Peña, a seasoned construction professional and founding principal at Prime Group Management, a boutique owner's representation firm specializing in ultra-luxury custom homes. Rick has over 25 years of experience and a portfolio exceeding $1 billion in residential and commercial projects. In 2009, he launched Prime Group, assembling a hand-picked team of senior experts, and since then, they've delivered 15 landmark estates totaling more than 230,000 square feet and $600 million. Educated in architecture at Georgia Tech and holding an MBA in real estate and finance from the University of Miami, Rick combines technical design insight with financial discipline. He is known for his professionalized, long-term approach to project delivery, orchestrating high-performing teams, controlling costs, and protecting the client's vision at every step. In an industry where the owner's rep role is still emerging and often misunderstood, Rick has set a high bar for professionalism and rigor. I've seen firsthand how organized and proactive his team is, making Prime Group one of the best examples of what an owner's rep firm can achieve. You'll soon see why he's earned the trust of some of the most discerning clients in South Florida and become a respected voice in his field. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you,
The
Rick.
Insider's Guide to Custom Homes. I'm so happy to have you here. Walk us through your journey, how you got here, and what's driving your focus right now.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that. I'm honored to be part of your podcast. I've been an early follower, big fan.
Thank you for that.
And I think it's a great thing you're doing. I'm excited to be a part of it. This is my first podcast, but excited. So my background, as you mentioned, I graduated from Georgia Tech in 1999 with a degree in architecture. And after that, went to work for a construction management firm called Bovis & Lease on the Four Seasons Hotel and Tower in downtown Miami. And that was a 70-story mixed-use high-rise, almost 800 feet tall, 1,008,000 square feet.
Wow.
Very exciting project. I was with Bovis from about 99 to 2004. I was hired by Tim Winsing, who was a very impactful mentor for me. And after we finished the Four Seasons, he was recruited by Ugo Colombo, real estate developer. And I followed him, and I was there from about 2004 to 2008. And there I worked on the Grosvenor House, the 32-story luxury condo, and then Mr. Colombo's personal residence, which is a 20,000 square foot home in Miami Beach. And it's an old Carl Fisher estate. So it was built in the 20s. You know, Carl Fisher was a big Miami Beach pioneer.
Sure.
Yeah, and it was a very significant home. So it was a great opportunity to be a part of it. And the way I looked at it then, it was like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You know, how many of these things come around? It was exciting. And Colombo, he was a great mentor too. And I learned about building teams, surrounding myself around good people, and being loyal to them. And he's been a great referral source for our business ever since. About 2009, I decided I wanted to get an MBA. So I went to the University of Miami and did a dual concentration in real estate and finance. Took a couple of years off. Well, I thought I was going to take a couple of years off. Trained for an Ironman race. It was a lot of fun. And actually, one of my good friends and training buddy, Stuart, was a big driver for me going to University of Miami to do my MBA. So very, very grateful for him. So did that. And in parallel to that, I started Prime Group Management in 2009. Mr. Colombo had introduced me to one of his friends that was building an estate on Star Island, a 20,000 foot home. So I'm thinking, wow, I mean, here, the second once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to work on these homes, which, you know, to me at the time was wild. Fast forward 16 years later, as you mentioned, we've completed about $600 million of single-family homes. Our current portfolio, we've got about $360 million, and we're about to break the $1 billion mark on just the residential homes. When you add in our commercial work, yes, it exceeds the $1 billion, but we're very excited about just the residential portfolio.
That's really amazing.
Thank you.
That's a big number.
Thanks. It's been a great journey. We've got a great team behind us, so.
Well, that's terrific. You've had your hand in both commercial, skyscrapers, private residence, even steering the delivery of intricate high-rise projects early in your career, like you just mentioned. What insights or disciplines from managing those large, complex builds now shape the way you approach today's ultra-luxury custom homes?
With these big projects and working for companies like Bovis and CMC, they're very process-driven, very organized in the way they do their estimating, their scopes of work, cost control, scheduling. So, you know, I took that same rigor and we apply it to homes.
Right. The commercial world is known for being a lot more rigorous than residential. But when you get to some of these intricate, super detailed, ultra high-end homes, they're almost like commercial projects from our experience. I mean, the sets of plans, the professionalism, what you have to do, the level of subcontractors.
Absolutely.
That's kind of where.
Absolutely. I mean, just a little insight in some of our homes. Our average home is about 20,000 square feet. The largest home we've done is 38,000 square feet. Our average build cost adjusted for today's market, is about $2,000 a square foot. That's excluding soft costs, professional services, and furniture.
That's with or without land?
That's without land. That's just the construction cost only. So $2,000 a square foot's our average. Lately, that's creeping up to about $3,000 a square foot. And in our most complex, highest end build, will probably break the $4,000 a square foot mark. So these dollar-wise, they're just as big as large commercial projects.
Yeah, that's tall cotton.
Right. Yeah. And the service that we offer our clients is, we manage them professionally, just like we would a large commercial project.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be a higher standard than your typical build. And I guess that's where you come in as a owner's representative. So you founded Prime Group Management in 2009, bringing together your handpicked team of seasoned professionals. What inspired you to start your owner's rep firm, and how you went about assembling the right team? And why do you think having a dedicated team versus working solo makes a difference delivering these complex projects?
Gotcha. Great question. We've got a great team, very like-minded individuals with diverse backgrounds. Our team averages about 20 years experience, and we have long-standing relationships with each of them. So, for example, one of our senior project managers, Matt, he and I have been working together since 2005. He's been with PGM since 2014, and his background's in construction management. He's got a general contractor's license, so he really brings a field knowledge and strength to our firm. And then we've got Santiago, who we've been working together since 2007. He's been with PGM since 2012, and his background's in civil and structural engineering. And he's really our cost control and our data analysis guy. And then we've got Vanessa, who we've also been working together since 2007, but she's been with PGM since 2014. And her background, similar to Santiago's, in civil and structural engineering. And she's probably one of our most senior project managers. And then we've got Mark, who's got a background in architecture, and we've been working together since 2018. He's been with PGM since 2022. He's got a great eye for design and quality. Then we've got Isaac, who's been with us since 2020, and he's our assistant project manager. He's our youngest guy. He's our fastest learner. Really been doing great with data analysis. And I'll tell you, between Santiago and Isaac, we call them our quants, the quantitative analysts. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Big Short, but the guys are great with our cost control, our budgeting, our reporting, because what's big in what we do is all of our historical data. We collect that, we analyze that.
Super valuable data.
Exactly. We adjust it for current market conditions, so it's real time, and it's this evolving database that we use and implement on every project. So that's our team. And you're right about owners reps. Some are firms, some are one-offs. Everybody's a little bit different. They're different models. I think the advantage of having a team is we have backup. Right? I can't be everywhere all the time. If it's a single owner's rep, you're kind of at the mercy of their bandwidth, their schedule, their availability. Whereas with the firm, and we're a very small firm, between myself and a senior project manager, there's always 2 contacts per projects. So there's always a point person available to continuously monitor the project. So I think that's an advantage to a firm.
Right. So you get great coverage. I think I noticed when I went to visit your operation, I was very impressed by the amount of work you do up front. And the due diligence you perform, the estimating you figure, calculate, budget prior to construction, again, with this big database of costs that you have, the schedules you put together, high-level schedules. I think it really sets a good pace for the contractor when he comes on board and you have a bar rather than just kind of feeling around once you bring the contractor on. So you do a lot of great upfront prep work, and I think that's a fantastic
thanks
attribute to your company.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I'm proud of what the team has done with our historical data and our estimates. I feel that they're very thorough, even from the conceptual level. We try to set the expectation. I think one of the biggest challenges with clients is setting expectations on cost, quality, time, right? So setting up that budget up front, making sure that we're all talking about the same, our goals are aligned. And the same thing with schedule, trying to account for as many activities as we can. So when we put together a project plan, we want to make sure it's well thought out and we've allocated the proper amount of time to each activity. So you take, for example, something like the windows and doors, right? A critical activity to any schedule to get a building dried in so you can start your finishes. But leading up to that point, before it gets to the job site, there's selecting the windows. There's integrating the windows into the construction set of documents. There's bidding it out to the subcontractors, buying it out. There's getting the shop drawing process going. There's the back and forth of the shop drawing process, which could take 1, 2, 3 rounds. There's finalizing that, getting the sub permit into the city, getting your permit, getting into manufacturing, right? Tracking the shipping, the delivery, getting it on the job site. There's so many activities just for that one line item.
Sure. And having the knowledge base that you have gives you the ability to say, hey, this isn't something we just go bid out 2 months before we need to order windows, because it's such a long lead time before
right.
Figuring out the specifications that work correctly, bidding it out, like I said, awarding it, getting shop drawings,
Yep.
and then proceeding into the works.
Yeah, absolutely, Rick. And we look at it sometimes, there's key trade partners that we'll bring into projects early, like the windows and some of these complex projects, and we have certain cladding elements or kinetic architecture. We'll bring those vendors in early so that in the design assist process, so we can integrate those into the construction drawings to give our general contractors a better head start when they receive the documents.
Yeah, and I think, again, the more upfront work you can do, it just sets the groundwork and allows you to meet the expectations of your owners, your subcontractors, your contractor,
Right.
all your trade partners, your consultants. There's a lot of parts and pieces that go together.
Sure.
So PGM focuses on ultra luxury generational homes. How is working with ultra high net worth clients on massive estates different from other projects? And in what way does an owner's rep help manage those challenges for your clients? So what is your central role, and how do you see yourself as your communication and your point person for that client?
I think the roles, regardless of the size of the project, you have all the same issues. The only difference is the scale and the dollar value. But for us, whether we're managing a home that's 10,000 square feet or a home that's 38,000 square feet, it involves all the same processes, all the same stakeholders, same players. I think for us, one of the biggest challenges in our initial goals is getting the client alignment with cost, schedule, quality, and scope.
So you're kind of teaching them along the way of what to expect, because obviously if you haven't built a 37,000 square foot home for $3,000 a square foot,
Absolutely.
you're not going to really understand that process. And there's a little bit of a learning curve. So
Right.
I think they rely on you
Right.
as the owner's rep.
Absolutely. And I know you use the same analogy with cars, right? And we can talk about cars. We can talk about an SUV like a BMW and an X3, an X5, and an XM. Those starting price points are, $45, $70, and $160,000. But we all know they're not the same car.
They all have four wheels. They all have a steering wheel. Shouldn't they be the same?
Exactly, right? And homes are the same way. So when clients ask me, well, how much should a home cost? It's a loaded question. There's so many variables that go into it. And I could tell a client, well, maybe your budget should be 1,000 a square foot, or maybe it should be 2,000 a square foot, but they're two very different price points. And it's educating clients up front so that we're all on the same page, so that when they hire a team, we all have the same goals and we're aligned. One challenge is when we don't get involved early, we won't start a project unless it's still in the pre-construction phase. But when we can't get involved in the job early, client might have hired a design team that's designing to one price point, but their expectation is a very different price point. And you can never go back and align them.
Right. And we always talk about design to budget. I think I had a podcast about that early on. And it's important that the architect and the design team really understands the parameters of where the owner wants to go with this project. And
Absolutely.
That's kind of your central role.
Absolutely. It is. An owner's rep, it's like I tell clients, we don't own it. We don't design it. We don't engineer it. We don't manage the construction. We don't build it, right? But the role that we play is that we're critical influencers in the process. And our goal is to take action to help influence the project in a positive way. And with more experienced project managers, I think they're better positioned to influence projects positively.
Yeah, and I think you give the information that the owners really need to get their arms around what it's going to take to build the home of their dreams and what to expect in terms of pricing, time frame, specifications, team, and the overall process.
Right. Our goal is to arm our clients with information so they can make informed decisions.
So as the client's advocate, how do you protect their interest and ensure they're always getting the best outcome? Maybe you can share an example of a time you intervened, made a tough call to make sure the project's quality or integrity wasn't compromised.
Well, I think the key is establishing expectations from the consultants, from the builder, from the subcontractors up front, right? And then establishing those expectations, establishing the alignment, and then holding the team accountable to meet those objectives. As far as examples, I think it all depends. There's scenarios where I think we've come in and helped negotiate contracts, whether it's with a general contractor or subcontractor that's been favorable to the client. There's scenarios where we get in there and look at schedules and look at potential roadmaps down the line, right? And that's where I like to focus our efforts to make sure that we don't have those road bumps along the way. We like getting into the design drawings and looking for inconsistencies and trying to flush out those errors early before they go out to the general contractor.
We find that always makes a big difference.
Sure.
If you can troubleshoot those problems before they occur, it prevents a ton of rework and just a lot of heartburn for the owners and for everybody involved.
Then we try to, if we see a weak link, we try to shore that weak link up. And that weak link could be anybody. It could be various stakeholders, or it could be scenarios or material tracking. And
a subcontractor could run into trouble during the course of a job where you have to make adjustments.
Absolutely.
It does happen on the best of jobs.
Absolutely.
So how do you deal with that?
I guess it depends, right? In different scenarios. So there's cases where we have material delivery issues. Those are trying to figure out why. Is the factory overseas? Are they not getting the right information or timely information on the shop drawings? Did the container not ship when they said it was going to ship? Or the cases where maybe it shipped, but the vessel took a lot longer to get here. Did it clear customs? Is someone on top of that broker? There's all these various touch points that we get into. And we don't get into all those touch points with every single vendor, but when there is an issue, we certainly will.
Right. So I assume you have weekly site meetings with your contractor and some subcontractors and kind of go through whatever issues come up.
Absolutely.
Review the schedule.
Absolutely. So every week we have our OACs, owner architect contractor meetings. We look at our hot list items. We look at our RFI logs. We look at our submittal logs. Are the RFIs getting answered in a timely manner? Are the submittals getting turned around quickly? Are we getting what we need from the consultants to review those submittals? And if we are we getting it back from the vendors to update them and resubmit them? We look at schedules, especially short-term look-ahead schedules, whether it's 30, 60, 90 days. We visit the job site weekly. We do our field observation reports. So we're not shy about sharing what we're seeing with the architect contractor. But key thing for us is communication, good, clear communication, whether it's written, verbal, or visual communications.
So to keep things on track, what strategies do you use when there's a surprise or change in the schedule? How do you then deal with the owner to make sure they maintain their confidence in the project and they understand the impact of when there's a change or when there is something that is beyond everyone's control? How do you deal with that with your owners?
We're completely transparent. We try to update them as quickly as possible if there is an issue. But when there's an issue that comes up, it's not just updating the client with what that issue is. It's, what's our mitigation plan? What have we done? So we go in there, we analyze it. We analyze what options we have, what we can take. So when we come to a client, we say, here's a problem, but we think we have these 2 other solutions to it. And whether it's change the material or it's change the subcontractor or maybe supplement the subcontractor with some additional resources. Or there may be things that are out of our control, like, during the pandemic, we had lead time issues with switchgear, with appliances. I mean, those things are completely out of our control, right? And in a lot of cases there, we're just sitting and waiting. So there's certain things that we can influence and there's certain things that we can't.
I think, again, your central role as the voice of reason with the owners gives them the confidence at the end of the day that with your level of expertise, you're going to work your way through these problems and these issues. And they do happen. And I think preparing owners for that eventuality when something is going to happen is important.
Sure.
And things happen. Every job has its issues.
Absolutely.
And its challenges. So just how you deal with them and how you keep everybody's at a level where, things are worked out and people just, motor through when there are issues. I think that's probably one of the key things that an owner's rep can bring to the table.
That's right. I think so, yes.
So what would be your biggest piece of advice for someone about to undertake their first ultra high-end custom home project? Are there any common mistakes, traps you'd warn a client or even a young builder to watch out for?
I think it's aligning yourself with the right team, with a reputable team, with a reputable architect, engineers, builders, subcontractors. It's vetting out your team and making sure that all of you are aligned on, as we mentioned before, cost, time, quality.
Right. So basically establishing all the parameters up front and making sure that everybody, again, you have the right team on board. I think it is super important.
That's right.
And I think when you're hiring an owner's rep, unfortunately, there's only a few Rick Peñas out there, and there are some traps you have to be aware of because, the regulations in this business is few and far between.
Yeah, there are none.
There are none.
There are none,
To be honest.
Owners' reps are typically been more of a commercial role. Real estate development firms have their owners' reps to oversee, their construction. In the residential world, it's a little bit like the Wild West, right? You get some architects, you get some builders that are owners' reps, you get business managers.
Sure, a real estate agent could be an owner's
real
rep.
estate agent, and then you get friends, and all of them have, various levels of experience. Some don't have any experience in the industry, so making sure that you're guided the proper way early on is important.
Yeah, I think it's amazing that there's no even base level. You don't even have to be a general contractor.
All I need is a pulse.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, I'm an owner's rep.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's my CV and
Exactly. Right.
And so that's, I think, one of the biggest pitfalls you have to be careful of when you hire an owner's rep because they're not all the same.
No. And I think reputation and checking up on references is huge.
Yeah.
For anybody, for architects, contractors, owners, reps. I'm constantly checking up on consultants, on builders, on subcontractors, because a person's past performance is not necessarily indicative of their current or future performance. All right.
Of course.
And your reputations are made, but they're quickly lost if you don't perform. So there's an old adage that says you're only as good as your last performance. And there's a lot of truth to that in this industry.
We see the same thing where we are. I mean, our reputation is everything.
Yeah.
So we sometimes get involved with clients early on when there isn't an owner's rep, and we end up playing the role of the ringmaster, trying to find out what they're looking for in architects and, what their vision is, what their budget is. So how do you go about selecting an architect for an owner if they don't have one? I mean, what are your parameters and how do you feel that out with an owner?
For us, it's a couple things. It's trying to understand a client's aesthetic, right? Because architects are strong in certain aesthetics as opposed to others. And then understanding a client's budget expectations.
Because different architects design different budget ranges.
Exactly. There'll be some architects that design in that $2,000 to $3,000 range, and there's some architects that design in the $1,000 to $1,500 range. And if a client has one level expectation, we'll get a team that aligns with that. And if they have a different level expectation, we'll get a team that aligns with that level. But they're not the same. So,
of course.
So I think really big into finding the right team that aligns with the client's goals.
I had a couple come in a few weeks ago, and they brought this beautiful set of plans, and we generally know what things cost when you start looking at them, the amount of windows, the type of design, et cetera. For some reason, they thought they could build it between $400 and $600 a square foot. And we knew just looking at the plan, it's $1,000 to $1,400 if it's a penny. And you feel for these people.
Yeah,
they spend a year and a half designing, paying for these beautiful plans. Their dream is set.
Right.
And then they go to price it out, and they find out they can't afford it. And they have to go back to square one. So
right.
I think, again, that's where we come in as a builder when they don't have an owner's rep, and I'm sure you as an
It's great when you do,
It's the same thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Everybody has a budget. I once had a landscape architect, Trent Wheeling, came to one of our meetings with a client, and he told our clients, the Lewins, everyone has an ouch point. Robert Lewin goes, what does that mean? He goes, there's always a point where you're going to say, wait. He said, well, explain that. He goes, well, if I told you your landscaping is going to cost $200,000, probably think it's okay. If I told you it's $500,000, you're going to go, yeah. If I told you it's $1.5 million to do a house on this project, what would you say?
Right.
Of course, ouch.
Sure. Yeah, that's right. It's a great point.
We all have to understand that there are parameters, and everyone, no matter who you are, has some sort of budget. But, to be fair, when you get owners reps involved, typically they're on the higher end of the spectrum. But even as such, I mean, you're building 30,000 square feet, you start multiplying that by $300 a foot, that's $90 million.
Sure, absolutely.
So is that what they were thinking from day one? And if it's not, where do you take it?
Right.
So let's kind of go into, kind of wrap up a bit, but you've been building your business by developing an impeccable reputation among a very exclusive client base, largely through referrals and word of mouth. What does it mean to you to have that kind of trust from clients and colleagues? And how do you maintain those relationships so that new opportunities continue to come your way?
We're very grateful to all of our current and past clients because our growth has purely been word of mouth, with maybe 80, 90% of it coming from client to client, and maybe other 10 to 15, 20% coming from particular stakeholders, say an architect or a contractor, or maybe even a subcontractor to client. That's our only marketing. Referrals, word of mouth is big for us. It's really built on the backbone of our reputation. And as we mentioned earlier, you're only as good as your last performance.
So how would someone find someone like you if it's not word of mouth? I guess you go to a website.
Well, I think you could go to the Yellow Pages, right? Go to the websites.
The Yellow Pages. I remember those.
Typically, your architect, your builder, they're going to know, your real estate attorney. They could start pointing you in the right direction. But you're right. I mean, it's not like we don't go and advertise. And I think if you Google owner's rep, maybe our name comes up or not. I don't really know.
I believe it does, but you come up with Joe Magadat's construction company as an owner's rep. So
right.
What does that mean? And 5 other people that you just don't know.
Sure.
It's tough.
I agree.
Like you said, it's the Wild West out there. And unfortunately, there are no associations. So do you see in the future or anytime that there will be some sort of association of owners' representatives in establishing any kind of standards in the industry?
That's an interesting question. To be honest with you, I don't know. I could maybe see some groups. What I've noticed, there's a lot of national and international management companies that acquire mid-size to smaller firms when they're expanding their territory into various footprints. So I see a lot of little guys get absorbed up into the bigger firms.
It's kind of becoming a regional trend to become bigger.
I think so on the commercial level. It's a really interesting model on the commercial side. I could see kind of those companies maybe driving some type of
Well, I think Cummins
standard.
recently was.
Cummins is right. There's another one. I think it's Gardner Theobald, I believe. And I hope I'm not butchering that name, but yes, there are a couple like that. And I could see them probably taking the lead in establishing some type of industry standard.
It just seems to me that would make sense. I
Yeah,
think,
for sure.
You know, when you're going to see an owner's rep, it'd be great to have a certification saying, yes, I'm a member of the National Association of Owners Representatives. These are the criteria. You don't just, put your application in, you're in.
Right.
You have to meet some certain standards.
Right. Just like the Project Management Institute, they've got their certifications, right? I could see something like that happening with the owner's rep.
Yeah. And I think it's actually time. There's just too many pitfalls for someone hiring the wrong person to run their job. They could drive it into the ground.
The risk is huge. You have to hire the wrong person. Yeah. No, we see it a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah. And again, we see it as well. A lot of times we'll be called into a project halfway through with someone who thought they could do it.
Right.
And, they had advisors there and the whole team. And, I just wish I could have said, hey, go call Rick Peña.
Sure.
He'll get you straightened out. He'll have you understand the whole process a little bit better, and you won't end up in the quagmire. But they eventually straighten it out, but it costs money and time.
It costs a lot of money. Yeah.
And aggravation.
Mistakes cost a lot of money for sure.
For sure. Yeah. So that's all of our goals, is to avoid as many pitfalls and mistakes as we can, meet the expectation of our owners, and give them a pleasurable experience where they can look back and say, really, I enjoyed being with Rick Peña. I enjoyed the contractor. I love the architect. It's been a great experience all the way through. I'm not going to say there weren't some bumps, but we were able to work through these things, and I love my house.
Sure, absolutely. I'll tell you, what's rewarding for us is there are several clients that we've done multiple projects for, over the last 10 plus years or so. It's really rewarding when the client calls us back and tells us they bought the lot or two next to them, they want to expand, or their family's expanded, or they've decided to move on to a new property and develop something new. So it's rewarding for us to have repeat clients in addition to the referrals.
We see the same thing here. We have some repeat clients as well. And it's funny, some of them were building their forever homes.
Right.
And then 3 years later, hey, I'm thinking the house is maybe not right for me, and I'm looking to do something else. And sure, let's sit down and let's talk about it. And it's great to have their confidence. And I think that's kind of the same thing for you and your company. It's reputation.
It really is. It's reputation. What excites us even more than some of the projects that we work on is, we want to do work for good people, right? I like working hard for good clients. That's really, for me, what really drives us more so than the size of the project or the dollar value.
It makes all the difference in the world. And it's funny, when I started in this business with my dad, 40 years ago, I had my first shot with a potential client. I spent weeks with this guy. I'm not going to mention names, but he was a doctor, and he was very artsy-fartsy, and he had this whole vision of what he wanted to build, and this blue glass and all this stuff.
Right.
And I priced it out, and I gave it to him. And then he came back and started negotiating, and then my dad stepped in. He said, this guy is not right for us. I spent all this time working with him. I have it all figured out. He goes, no, you don't. You're not the right client for us.
Yeah.
And I got all angry, and then he kind of laughed it off. He said, one day you'll see. And, years later, I definitely see. I mean, you have to sometimes choose your clients.
That's true. Yeah. We do try to be very selective. We only take on a select amount of projects that we know that we can.
You can only do so many of that
right.
level.
When there's bandwidth that opens up, sometimes the timing aligns great with certain clients. And sometimes we just don't have the bandwidth, and some great clients come in.
So what happens then? Do you refer them to another owner's rep that may be able to help them?
We do, yeah. We certainly do. There's a handful of owners reps we're all friendly with, as we were talking about earlier. We can't take everything on. We don't want to try to take everything on. So we try to help guide clients that we can't take on the best we can, even if it's just as a courtesy meeting, set their expectations and point them in the right direction.
Yeah, well, I heard recently more businesses die of overeating than from starvation. I mean, they overindulge, they take too much on. Everybody says, well, figure it out.
Right.
That's a terrible
fake
attitude.
it till you make it,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, and especially during the pandemic, because the market just blew up, in 2001, 2002. There was just so much work. And unfortunately, there were a lot of people that just took on a lot more than they could handle. That resulted in poor performance. So it's been a difficult few years.
Yeah, and I think it seems to have settled down a bit. I mean, there was a time 4 years ago, it was hard just to get a subcontractor to call you back.
That's right.
Now it's a little bit different. I'm starting to get the opposite. Hey,
Sure.
I'm Joe's plumber. Can you use me? And it's like, well, weren't you the guy I called
Right.
3 years ago? You wouldn't take my call?
That's exactly right. Yeah, it all comes around, doesn't it?
It does come around. And fortunately, our cast of characters, the subcontractors we deal with, have been really loyal and valuable to us. They are trade partners.
For sure.
It's hard to replace some of them. And we're always looking to add and find new people to bring onto the team.
Right.
But I think you're only as good as the people you work with.
Exactly. I agree with the partners, and there have been a lot of long-term relationships that we have with vendors, a lot of common vendors that you and I share. We try to take care of them.
So in wrapping up, any final takeaway messages you like to leave with our listeners about an owner's rep and the kind of world you live in?
Sure. So, custom homes are complex systems, right? With a lot of dependencies, and some that you control, some that you can't control, but it's really trying to manage those expectations early. But projects inevitably end up costing more than you wanted. They end up taking a little bit more than you expected. It's par for course for these big animals, right? But I think what's important is you try to surround yourself around a good team, good architect, good builder, good owner's rep, a team that you can align your goals early, that are very open in communication, very transparent in the process, so that you work through the process as a partner. Wouldn't marginalize experience. Bringing on a good owner's rep is very beneficial to the project, especially if you bring them on in the planning phase. I think that's going to be the
Getting
biggest,
in early is
the biggest value someone
the
could
most
bring.
important thing.
Right. As I mentioned earlier, if we don't have enough runway before a project is ready to break ground, we won't get involved because we don't want to.
There's a lot of planning involved.
100%. And I think that's really where we can add our value.
That's great. That's great. Well, thanks again, Rick, for sharing your insights with our listeners on the Insider's Guide to Custom Homes. I'm Rick Bell, your host. And until next time, keep learning, keep building, and enjoy the journey.